V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledoratam berit olam V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et Lasod et ha-Shabbat Ledoratam berit olam Ben Yuven v'nei Yisrael Oti leolam, V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledoratam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et ha-shamayim v'et ha'aretz v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat ledoratam berit olam Uvayom ha'ashvi Shabbat v'nafash Shabbat v'nafash v'shamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod Shabbat ledoratam berit olam Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Boy, Riagafen. Amen. Chaim. Hadir. Okay, Torah study blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei. Amen. Okay, so it's the proper greeting on the intermediate days of the holiday is Moadim L'Simcha. So Moadim L'Simcha, Shabbat Shalom. We have no Torah portion this week because it is what we call Chol HaMoed Pesach. So we have a special reading for Torah. So we're just going to study today themes of Passover. So in particular, so we're going to start Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12, verse 1. If anyone has the page, you can shout it out. It's 458. It's 105 if you have the Saperstein, which you probably don't. You should, but you don't. Okay. So, we get the name of the holiday. You know, of all the things that, if you just heard the story, and you didn't know the name of the holiday, and you had to pick a name for the holiday, Gesundheit, you know, you might pick something other than naming the holiday after just one detail of the whole thing. Because the passing over was just for the 10th plague, not for the first 9. Has nothing to do with so much the Jews actually leaving Egypt. It just has to do with one detail, which was the 10th plague where God killed, or the angel of death that God sent killed the firstborn of the Egyptians, but passed over the Jewish people. And the Hebrew word for Passover is Pesach, lefaseach. Now, you could say that Pesach, you could translate it as passed over. You could also translate it as protected. Although we have another word for Hebrew for protection, which is lehagen, which, you've heard of a Magen David. Magen, like the protection of David. So there must be something more powerful about the word Pesach than just the idea that it was one detail of the final plague. I mean, there must be something more to that theme of protection and Passover, so that concept would encompass the theme of the whole holiday, not just that one plague. Does that make sense? I mean, otherwise, why not just call it the holiday of the Exodus? You know, get more of a reggae feel to it. All right. So what I want to do then, in order to try to figure this out and figure out how it affects our lives today, is to look at Exodus chapter 12, which is where we learn about the passing over of the Jewish homes. And obviously what the Jews had to do, and this is a big hint, but what the Jews had to do in order that God would pass over their homes. Now, we know that the Jews lived primarily in a place called Goshen. But towards the end, once the plague started, the Jews moved into different areas. Because you might have said, God could have said to the angel of death, listen, go kill all the firstborn, except for that neighborhood. You know, you don't need the blood. I'm just going to tell you, the Jews live here. Everyone else lives there. So go there. Or, even if the Jews were mixed in, God could have given the angel of death a directory. You know, we have one. We have an app for it. You know, it's called Shul Cloud. But this could have been the original Shul Cloud. And he could have said, look, you know, if the name is Cohen, leave him be. You know, so why did the blood need to be painted on the door in order for the Passover to occur? Surely the angel of death could have figured it out without the blood on the door. So now we've said a couple things. One is that God sent an angel to protect the Jews, but two, if the Jews wanted to be protected, they had to participate in their own protection. Clear so far? Okay, so with all that in mind, let's begin now with Exodus chapter 12, verse 1. Okay, Norman, do you have it?
Yeah.
Okay, right into the mic. There you go.
The Eternal One spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus, when a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be impure 7 days."
No. Right number.
12:1, yeah.
Yeah, that's Leviticus. We're Exodus. No, it's page 458.
Not in this book.
Yeah, 458. You're on 735.
I have a different book.
Okay. Verse
The
1.
Lord said to Moses.
Yeah. Okay, got it?
Here we go.
Okay, here we go.
The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of the months. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. Speak to the whole community of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household. But if the household is too small for a lamb, then let him share one with the neighbor closest to his household in the number of persons. You shall apportion the lamb according to what each person should eat. Your lamb shall be without blemish."
So what does it mean if the house is too small? Because you have to eat all the food. So if you don't have enough people to eat all that food, you can't waste it. So that you can share with other people so that the meat that's offered as the Paschal sacrifice doesn't get wasted. That's what it means. It doesn't mean that like you don't live in Pinecrest. The house is here. All right, it doesn't matter.
Okay, your lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of this month, and all the aggregate community of the Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they are to eat.
Okay, and this verse 7 is one of the most consequential verses in the entire Torah. Because, first of all, there's no holiday that's mentioned more than Passover. It's in our prayers all over the place. I mean, there are echoes of Pesach all day long, right? All throughout the Ve'ahavta. I mean, we see Mitzrayim in the liturgy all the time. And really, this is going to define the rest of the Torah from this point forth. In fact, even Genesis is about the Exodus. Genesis is about the descent into Egypt. I mean, that's the whole idea, that Joseph was the microcosm of the first slave whose brothers forced him into Egypt. If you were at our second night Seder, I talked about the 2 dippings. You know how you say on all other nights? Usually we don't dip at all, but tonight we dip twice. So it's not necessarily true. Like if you, Sebastian Maniscalco, if you've ever seen him, he dips at every meal. Right? He needs bread. It doesn't matter if you didn't see it. But there's 2 dippings. So this is kind of a weird thing to say. What are we dipping? What's of the 4 questions? The 4 questions. The one that says, "Why do we dip twice?" What are the 2 dippings? So according to Rabbi Sachs, the first dipping represents the descent into Egypt. Well, what was the first dipping? When the brothers hated Joseph and they dipped his coat of many colors into the blood and then showed it to their father. That's the first dipping. But that, at the time that the Jews were free, because of that hatred for Joseph, they ended up as slaves. He ended up as a slave, and that began the whole slavery. So the hatred and not being able to handle their freedom led to the slavery. That's the first dipping. And so they dipped something sweet, their freedom, into something bitter, their hatred, which is what we do with the parsley or the celery, a totally healthy, tasty vegetable, but you dip it into the salt water. So something sweet into something sour. What's the second dipping? The second dipping comes in Exodus. You just saw it. When they dip like the hyssop into the blood to put it on their doorposts and their lintels, that's the second dipping. And so they were dipping their slavery into their freedom, which is why the second time around we dipped the maror into the charoset. We did something sour into something sweet. Do you see that? Those are the 2 dippings. So that's why we dip twice. But the first dipping represents our descent into slavery, and our second dipping represents that moment where we're going free. And where did you see that? Just now in verse 7. What's the second dipping? Putting the blood on the doorposts as a sign of freedom. Because this is the 10th plague, and then we leave. Richard? Can we pass the microphone back?
Oh, I need.
To Richard.
What is the term for striking between Jews? When Jews fight between one another, that's the downfall of Judaism.
Oh, sinat chinam. Baseless hatred, right?
The brothers are divided between themselves. I didn't make this up, I read it. The brothers are divided between themselves, and that's the first indication of what's the strife between Jews forces us into slavery.
No doubt, yeah.
The other end, the hyssop and the blood, is when all of the Jews came back together and they left slavery into freedom as a unified people.
Yes.
Great metaphor.
And it continues on because that's what destroyed the second temple. That's why we're sitting here. Right? That's why we're here now. Because of sinat chinam is what, that same baseless hatred that caused the second temple to be destroyed. We didn't learn from that lesson. So, we did, but, they didn't. So, because all Jews get along so well today. Okay. So now we're up to verse 8.
They shall eat the flesh that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw, cooked in any way with water, but roasted, head, legs, and entrails over the fire. You shall not leave any of it over until morning, or if any of it is left over until morning, you shall burn it. This is how you shall eat it. Your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is a Passover offering to the Lord. For that night I will go through the land of Egypt and strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And I will mete out punishments to all the gods of Egypt, I, the Lord. And the blood on the houses in which you dwell shall be a sign for you. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, so that no plague will destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt.
Okay, now, do you see there's two themes mixed in together here? One theme is that you're going to offer the sacrifice, right? We're talking about the animal that you need to get and the animal that you need to bring and how you're supposed to eat it and so forth. And that's what we do for the rest of history now, as long as there's a temple, is on the 14th day of Nisan. You go and find your animal, you slaughter it, you bring it, you offer it to, and they give you the meat home, and you go home and you eat it at your Seder. That's one theme that's being discussed here, but the other theme that's being discussed here is what's happening in your home with the blood. So there's the animal that's taken and offered on the altar, but there's the blood that's being put on the doorpost so that God can protect you. You see the two themes are woven together here? Because normally, when you offer the sacrifice on the altar, you take the blood and you throw it at the base of the altar. This is the only time in history where the blood is not used on an altar, it's used in the home. This has never happened again. But there's a transference here of holiness from what should have been taking place on an altar in the holy temple and brought into the home. This never happens again. This is a one-time thing. I hope that on Pesach, you're not like slaughtering animals and painting your doorpost still. That's over. We don't do that anymore. Some of you are like, ooh. Right, you knew that, right? We don't do that with the blood anymore? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, if you live in a building. Okay, now, if you look, so now I have a whole bunch of sources on the sheet. If you look on the sheet, I want to take you to a midrash. Do you not have one? Are there any left? I made a lot. Where are they? Okay. Anyone not have? Okay, it looks like we... Oh. You can pass it to Bobby? Okay. There should be plenty.
Thank you.
Okay, so, Judy, we're at... The first midrash here is from the Mechilta de Rebbe Ishmael. By the way, the Torah portion we're reading from is Bo. And here's what it says there, where it says, isn't it logical?
Isn't it logical if the blood of Pesach in Egypt, which was light in that it was only temporary, it didn't apply day and night, and it didn't apply for future generations. And yet the text says, he will not allow the destroyer to enter. Then mezuzah, which is strict, having in it the 10 special names of God, applying day and night, and applying for future generations. How much more likely is it to prevent the destroyer?
Wow. Did you catch that? That's a really, really powerful statement. The whole point of the mezuzah is to remind you of the blood on the doorposts. But not just to remind you, to provide the same protection that you get that the Jews got with the blood. Nothing is supposed to be able to damage you in your home so long as you have a kosher mezuzah. Now, you have to get your mezuzah checked every 3.5 years because there are chemicals in the ink And the chemicals in the ink could cause the letters to crack. And if a letter cracks, it's not kosher. It needs to be repaired by a sofer, by a scribe. So, they have these mezuzah, Kabbalistic mezuzah readers. You bring your mezuzah scroll to him, and he looks at it, and he says, oh, my goodness, I could see, there's something wrong with your son. And you're like, oh, my God, how did you know? Because the word son, teach it to your sons, that letter's cracked, so it's obvious. So if you believe in that, then have at it. But the purpose of the mezuzah is to represent the same sort of protection that the blood on the doorposts represented, according to this midrash.
But the word mezuzah is not mentioned anywhere in the Torah, is it?
When you say put the blood on the doorpost, what's the word that he uses in Hebrew? Mezuzah. That's how you say doorpost. What? Yeah, it's in the mezuzah. It's like you set that, it's like I paid you to say that. Now, a mashkof is a lintel. The lintel's the top part. That's a mashkof. The Hebrew word the Torah uses for the sides, mezuzah. Pretty cool, right? Okay, next source. The Sefer HaChinuch is a medieval, early medieval, anonymous text. Sefer HaChinuch means the book of education. And what it does is it goes through and explains the purpose of all 613 mitzvahs. So the explanation of mitzvah number 187 is, Ken, where it says the nefesh means soul.
The nefesh is linked to blood. Therefore, it is fitting for us to cover that life and hide it from sight before we eat the meat. Otherwise, we would instill a degree of cruelty in our souls, eating the meat while the life is poured out before us.
Okay, so when you offered a sacrifice in the Holy Temple, what they would do was they would slaughter the animal. If you wanted, you were allowed, if you weren't a priest, you were allowed to slaughter the animal yourself at the entrance to the gate, and then you would hand the animal over to the priest. You couldn't cross over into the courtyard if you weren't a priest. And the priest would take it, and then there was a lot left to do. And they would take it, and they would drain all the blood, and salt it, and cut it, and certain parts had to be, the Torah explains it, certain organs had to be discarded, then they put it on top, put the frankincense, put the wine, and burn it. Then, if it wasn't a sin offering, they would take the meat and bring it back to you, and you could take it home and eat it, and they would take a piece for themselves, for the effort. Right? But the priests always get a cut. Literally a cut. But when they took the blood, they had these special cups. And then they had to, if you read through the Torah, and especially if you read through the halachic works like Mishnah Torah or Shulchan Aruch, it tells you very explicitly, if you don't throw the blood at the base of the altar, because the blood is the soul, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. It doesn't count. And they actually had, the altar, when the priests were walking through, there was blood everywhere at their feet. I mean, it was very bloody. They're sacrificing thousands and thousands of animals. I mean, think of all the Jews brought their Paschal offering on this day. So there was a sewer on the Temple Mount, and the blood went into the sewer. Archaeologists have found these sewers. They actually found it. And it would take the blood from the Temple Mount out of like what we would know as the old city today, and the blood would empty out into the valley. But they found those sewers, and they found inside animal bones and DNA from blood, and they were able to figure out what those animals were, and every single one of those animals that they found were kosher animals, the ones that were prescribed to be by the Torah on the altar, which is proof that, or at least evidence, it's evidence that the animals that were offered on the Holy Temple were the ones that the Torah said you should offer. Okay, so the idea is, though, and the reason I brought this source is to say this, that the soul of the animal is in the blood. And so that was the part that had to be painted on the door. But that means that when you put a mezuzah on your doorpost, there's supposed to be some representation of your soul. Where? In the idea of what it means to enter into your home. That your soul pervades your home. And the concept, this wasn't, Jim Morrison didn't come up with this on his own. The concept of the door. So, that wasn't the first, really great, idea that you've missed. There have been a few. I'm sort of just, you're going to have to go back and watch the class, see what you missed. But the concept of the door in Judaism is very powerful, right? There are many times where we hear that Moses and Aaron would go and meet God, El Petach Ohel Moed. Do you know that phrase? What is Petach? The opening of the tent of meeting. But it's also where Abraham would go to greet the angels. Petach Ohel. And it is also where the judges would sit at the gate of any city. And there's this concept in the Torah that when you go through a door, you're passing over from one sphere to another. And when you go into your home, and your soul is represented at the crossing point, that once you come into my home, it's as if you're coming into contact with my soul, because in this place I have control, and I control it so that it's a spiritual place. I can't control what's out on the other side. That's chaos. But in here I can control it, which is why I always thought it was hilarious growing up as a conservative Jew. If you're a conservative Jew, at least in the old days, where I grew up, as soon as you entered when we come on Saturday morning, there'd be someone there to make sure you had a yarmulke on, even if you weren't Jewish. God forbid someone should come in and walk 4 amot without a kippah, walk 4 feet without a... I mean, it would be like someone would come out of the woodwork, like someone dressed as a plant, and just slam it on your head. Because God forbid you should walk into this holy space where everything in there reminds you of God and not have this to remind you of God. But when you go out and nothing reminds you of God, don't worry, you can take it off. They had it wrong. You need it out there. In here, you're good. In here, you're looking at the Torah the whole time. I don't know. I always thought it was... I never understood it. Okay. Next source, another midrash. Who are we up to? Ken? Victor? Victor? Okay, do you see where it's... you're throwing me for a loop.
This is closer to the microphone.
Yeah, you got upgraded. You got box seats now. Okay, so the third source is another midrash where it says, and they shall put.
And they shall put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel, inside or perhaps outside. The text says, I will see the blood, visible to me, not visible to others. This is the position of Rabbi Ishmael. Okay,
so the rabbis had a debate, and they were wondering, when you put the blood on the doorpost, you put it on the outside so that the angel can see it, and so God can see it outside? Or do you put it on the inside so that the people living there could see it? And if it was only on the inside, how'd the angel see it? I mean, we imagine angels, they could see it. But you sort of lose the symbolism of putting it outside. So the rabbis asked the question. So the first position of Rabbi Ishmael is, the text says, visible to me, not to others. So this would be on the outside, right? Because visible to me means to God on the outside. But Rabbi Natan says, no, that's not what I think. He says inside means, it's inside, visible to me. Then Rabbi Natan says, wait, maybe it's outside. Because the text says the blood shall be a sign for you and not a sign for others. Rabbi Yitzchak said outside, so that the Egyptians would see it and their innards would be sliced up. So the third rabbi comes and says, listen, you're going to know it's there if you paint it either way, and God's going to know if it's there either way. But the idea was to scare the Egyptians, to let them know. Now, why would this scare the Egyptians? What would be scary to the Egyptians about it? Richard?
That lamb was a god to
Yes.
the Egyptians. I'd like your thoughts on this. We just had the 10 plagues. The Egyptians saw the power of our God. And then we're told, take their God, tie it to a stake in your yard for 3 days, and then kill it in front of them, roast it, and eat it. Come on.
Boy,
I think that clearly demonstrates the power of God, don't you?
I was going to say, this is a really hard question. No one's going to get it, and then you got it.
Sorry.
No, but here's the difference. No, you're exactly right. It's beautiful. But here's the difference. Each plague attacked something different that the Egyptians thought were gods. The first 9, God attacked them. In the 10th one, the Jews themselves are killing the gods of the Egyptians. You see, we ourselves are slaughtering your gods. Now, we told you that our God could slaughter your gods. You saw that. Our God defeated your God of the sun. Our God defeated your God of the water. Our God defeated everything you think's the God. But now we ourselves, who used to be your slaves, we're slicing and dicing your gods right in front of you, and there's nothing you can do about it. That really sent a message.
And not only that, the sign of that their God was slaughtered on the doorpost, then the life inside that home was also saved, because they knew, hey, all the kids in those houses, they didn't have their firstborn killed.
Wait, say it one more time.
The Egyptians would see publicly that everywhere there was blood on the door, those firstborns weren't
Exactly.
killed. Life
Exactly.
was saved.
And that's what the next source is meant to represent. So
the real God wasn't upset that their, quote, God was killed and smeared on the door, because that isn't God, and the real God saved the life inside that home.
100%. So look at the next source. Do you see where it says Ibn Ezra on Exodus 12:12? Look what he says there. This will be a sign.
This will be a sign for you to strengthen your hearts so that you will not feel fear when you hear the cries of the Egyptians as their firstborn die from the destroyer.
Right, so the blood is also a sign to remind the Jews, don't get scared. Because this particular plague is going to be very scary. Because for the first 9 plagues, you were mostly living in Goshen, but now you've moved into cities because I told you to come here and collect all the money. And so now you're over here living near the Egyptians in your tents over here, and it's going to be really scary, and you're going to hear all these cries. But don't worry. The blood will remind you that I'm not coming for you. Because it had to have been really scary to hear people dying all around you, all of a sudden, and mothers screaming, and, it had to have been terrifying. Okay.
Question that sometimes I've wondered what was in fact written in the ancient Mesusot that we had in Israel when it was first settled after Joshua. For instance, was it only the first verse of the Shema, Behavta? Was it written, textually written around the doorpost instead of like on a little box?
No.
Attached to it?
No. It would have been the same way that we have it now. The Talmud explains how they did it. Same type of animal parchment, same type of ink, and so forth. And the Talmud actually goes into great detail about the ink. It's exhausting.
So no written with blood around the
No.
doorpost, only the one sentence.
No, you couldn't do that. Can you use the microphone?
Do you have any problem with the fact that our God is okay with collateral damage?
What do you mean?
Well, the women crying, the babies dying.
Look, I hope they were all guilty. I don't know. These are bad people. These are people who we're happy to watch and see the Jews suffering, terribly. So I hope they're all guilty. But usually we don't have people who are punished. Usually we don't have people who are punished who are innocent. I mean, that's pretty rare. But I would imagine there were plenty of youth here amongst the Egyptians. So yeah, sure, it's problematic. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for how God killed innocent kids, other than it was in Pharaoh's hand to let the Jews go, and he's the one who said, he needed something convincing. But yeah, I could see that being problematic. Yeah. And pass the mic back.
It wasn't problematic to the Egyptians to see the babies being drowned in the Nile or their mothers screaming.
Right.
I think that when you go to war or you're destroying something or somebody, you understand that there will be collateral damage.
Question over here? Oh, okay. So first, can we pass, where are the mics? First Stuart and then Carol. Give everyone a chance here.
I think that killing kids is always problematic. However, there's a certain symbolism associated with it as well.
Okay.
And that's a symbolism of the future. And what that concepts and behaviors are transmitted and carried forward by youth. And that repetition is usually a function of educating young people in one direction or another. And so if you're going to put an end to that kind of behavior,
Yeah.
that also, and now is important. So I don't mean to sound cold, but on the other hand, with regard to the other comment about fearing, I think when you hear the cries, I think also that the Jewish people are an emotional people, and that they also not only feared the reprisal from the slaughter, but also feared a weakening in their resolve due to a sympathy when you hear a mother cry and you hear a child cry. And I think all of that goes along with...
and actually I have some other thoughts on that, but I have a lot more to get to and we're running out of time. I don't want to get too far, sorry, and there's 37 comments. But it's a powerful topic to discuss. Carol first, and then Bobby, and then Jay, and then whatever time's left, we'll see.
So do you think the God who knows all things and can see all things could see the future that these babies would grow up and kill the Jews for no reason?
Look, I think that God's always right, but I think that we don't always understand his reasoning. And so, I'm sure there's a good reason, but I don't know that the human mind can necessarily process it. So if God did it, it's right. How could you come here and say God was wrong? Like, he messed up? Like, that's not a concept that we can believe in. But that he did something that we can't understand or that makes no sense to us, that I can live with. I think there's a lot of things God does that we don't get. So.
Rabbi, when did the philosophy of Eliyahu become part of the Seder tradition?
The Haggadah was written 2,000 years ago. So that's when they would have put it in, that concept. It was written by the rabbis who wrote the Mishnah. So about 1,900 years ago. But the concept comes back from the idea that he was taken by God on a chariot to heaven and then comes back. That's in the Torah. That's in, that's in the Tanakh. That's in the book of Samuel. But the very last prophet was Malachi. And the last verse in the last book of Malachi says, the very last thing that God ever said to a prophet, because Malachi was the last prophet. And the last verse in Malachi is, I'm going to send you Elijah. So that's the last thing God ever said to the Jewish people. clearly through a prophet, was I'm going to send you Elijah. So that's where the idea comes from. And that he was, Malachi was about 250 years before the second temple was destroyed. So rise of hope. No doubt, yeah. There's always hope, even in the darkest places.
So in the killing of the firstborn, is there a symbolism why it was the firstborn? Because I guess in Judaism, they get all the benefits, the rights, the
No,
prayers.
well, yes and no. The idea was that Pharaoh said to God, you can destroy all my gods, but I'm still not going to let the Jews go because I have one more God that you can't destroy, and that's me. I believe that I'm a God. Well, so they would say to the Pharaoh, how could you be a God? You're going to die like all the other pharaohs before you. No. I live on through my firstborn son. And once he destroyed all the firstborns, it became clear that no human could be a God that could pass on to the next generation. And once that happened, then Pharaoh said, wow, we really have no gods left. And that's when the Jews left. So that was the point there. Okay, let's keep going. So let's go now on to the second page, the one that starts, the source says, and they shall place the blood on the two doorposts and on the lintel. This is another midrash. Everyone see that? Okay, so I want to get back to the idea of what I'm trying to show today is what ultimately is the point of the putting the blood on the doorpost. Why is that so important? And why did the name of the holiday come from that? Clear so far? Okay, Annabella.
And they shall place the blood on the two doorposts and on the lintel. I might have thought that reversing the order and putting the lintel first might disqualify the mitzvah.
Okay, so, and this is what Talmud is. Talmud is looking very closely at what it says in the Torah and figuring out what that means. So when it says, and place the blood on the two doorposts on the lintel, what he said is, if I put it on the lintel first and then the doorpost, I've done it wrong and it won't work. That's the question that he's asking. Okay?
But then the Torah also says, and you shall put the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts. So putting one before the other is still effective.
Okay, so later on it says it in the reverse. The Torah doesn't always say put it on the doorpost and then the lintel. There's another place in the Torah where it says put it on the lintel and then the doorpost, which teaches this rabbi that the order is not important. You can do it either way you want. Now, what does that matter? Okay, well, let's see.
We see that our ancestors had 3 altars in Egypt, the lintel and the two doorposts. Rabbi Ishmael said there were 4, the bowl, the lintel, and the two doorposts.
Okay, now that's a big statement. What did he just say? He said that the Jews offered sacrifices when they were in Egypt, but they had no holy temple and they had no altar. So it wouldn't have been uncommon to use the doorposts of their home as the altar, which means that there's a concept of transference of holiness from the holy temple to the home. That's something that could happen in Judaism. Okay? Now, more proof of that. Here's section now. This is from the Talmud, Bavli Brachot 55a. Joe?
And one who extends his time at the table earns long life. A pauper might come, and he could give him. It is like Yezechel.
Yechezkel is the Hebrew of Ezekiel.
The altar was of wood, 3 amma tall, and he told me, this is the table that is before God. It began with an altar, and it ended with a table. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Eliezer explained, as long as the temple stood, the altar atoned for Israel. Now a person's table atones for him.
Okay, so at your dinner table, you have challah, you have wine, you have meat, and you're supposed to talk about Torah. Which means that because we don't have the holy temple anymore, the transference of what happened in the temple, a place where you could atone for your sins, was transferred to your dinner table. And that was supposed to be a holy place. Because remember, the food, the animals that you sacrificed in the temple, you then got the meat from the priest and went home to your table and ate it. And there was a certain way you did it, and you talked about Torah and why you were eating this meat and so forth. And now what we're saying is, because we don't have a holy temple anymore, the transference of holiness could be to the one place that your soul pervades, where you can control the environment, and that is the home. Okay? Your home is supposed to be a holy place. Okay? So, and we've pointed that out in two ways. One, the purpose of the table and the dinner, and two, the doorpost, and that in Egypt, the doorpost was considered the altar, and there were three, the two doorposts and the lintel. Why three? We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, so Rashi, so here's a section from Menachot. There's another section of Talmud, and then I brought you just a little bit of Rashi on there. Shelley, where it says, we learned
Similarly, if one suspends a mezuzah from a pole or places it behind the door, there is danger and one has not fulfilled the mitzvah. The servants of King Munbaz did this when they stayed in an inn as a memorial for the mezuzah. Rashi, since you practice mezuzah improperly, the house is not protected from mazikin.
Okay, so what you just saw here is an evolution of Judaism. So, by the way, King Munbaz, anyone ever heard of this guy? Amazing guy. He lived in northern Iraq, and he was a king in a place called Abiadene, A-B-I-A-D-E-N-E. I think it's pronounced Abiadene or something like that. And these were the Parthian people or something like that. But he converted to Judaism, 1st century. And the Talmud speaks of him highly. He was the son of Helena in the 1st century, and he converted to Judaism and lived as a Jew. And converted his little, fiefdom or whatever he had into real Jews. And the Talmud speaks highly of him, and he had some customs. And so one of the things was, he says, even if I'm traveling and I stay at a hotel, I bring a mezuzah. But he did it wrong, so it didn't work. Okay, that's what Rashi says. But the idea you can draw from this is, when you do it right, the mezuzah is meant to protect your home, which means to say it's supposed to do the same thing that the blood did on the doorposts. You see how this idea evolved over Jewish time, over history. Okay, now it evolved in some weird ways too. And this is where it gets a little bizarre. Now, if you ever look at, you've seen a page of Talmud, you have the text in the middle, and on one side you have Rashi, on the other side you have those other guys. Those other guys are called Tosafot. So now we have the other guys. Who were the Tosafot? The students of Rashi. There were a whole school of them in France and Germany in the 12th, 13th centuries. And here's what they wrote. So a comment from Rashi's students. Tosafot comments. Bill?
So Tosafot comments on the Talmudic statement that one should not remove the mezuzah when moving out of a home. Although Shmuel ruled that one may transfer tzitzit fringes from one garment to another, this is prohibited regarding mezuzah because damaging forces come into a house which has no mezuzah. Thus, one who removes the mezuzah damages those who will dwell in the house.
Right, when you leave your home, you're supposed to leave the mezuzah. Now, if you know the people next to it are going to damage it, or, throw it out, or do something, then you can take it. But if if Rabbi Menachem Mendel, Finkelstein buys your home, you should leave it. If Joe O'Callahan buys it, you might ask him, what do you think? You're going to be okay with this? But if someone Jewish is going to buy your home, then you risk leaving them to be damaged without having the mezuzah. Now, are non-Jews damaged by not having a mezuzah? No, but they don't have the mitzvah. This isn't a mitzvah for non-Jews. There are 7 mitzvahs, the laws of the Noahide laws for Jews, but mezuzah is not one of them. Genya, can you pass the mic back to her? Or just spit it out? I can't hear you. Okay, no one at home will hear you. Yeah. I'll repeat the question. Didn't we just? Yeah. If you know they're not Jewish, you should take it with you. If you know that they're not Jewish, you should take it with you. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to get into a little bit of weird stuff. So, if you look at the last source on this sheet here, it says Maimonides, the Rambam, from the Mishnah Torah, the laws of mezuzah. Look, he says, the practice has spread. So when he says that, you know he's going to say, what are you doing? Like, what is this? Who started this? Are you crazy? You with me so far? So he says, the practice has spread. Now, sometimes he'll say, since that's what people do, you should do it. But sometimes he really doesn't like it. So he writes, to write on the external surface of the mezuzah, opposite the blank spaces between paragraphs, Shaddai. It's written Shakai here, so we don't take God's name in vain. There is no loss in this, for it is on the outside. So if you have your scroll of the mezuzah, and on the back side where it's empty, you write, God's name, Shaddai. It's okay. But those who write the names of angels inside, though, or the holy names, or a verse, or a seal, are in the category of those who have no share in the next world. That's harsh. Imagine being a great person all your life. You did everything you were supposed to. But you wrote the name of an angel in your mezuzah. And you get to heaven, they say, sorry. That axe murderer can come in because he repented. But you? All right, so it's a little harsh. But what he's saying is, all right, so it's not enough for these fools that they annul the mitzvah. They also take a great mitzvah, the declaration of the unified name of God, love of God, and service of God, and treat it as an amulet for their personal benefit, as it has entered their foolish hearts, and this is something meant to provide them with pleasure in this vain world. In other words, people started at this time to make amulets. I had a whole course in rabbinical school on Jewish magic. And it's all Kabbalistic. And Maimonides was not into Kabbalistic stuff at all. He understood it, but he wasn't a Kabbalist. And so people were starting to write different codes and magic spells on their mezuzahs for extra blessings. And Maimonides says, look, it's enough. Don't, you're messing with the mitzvah. Don't do that. But my point in bringing this is to show you that people, Jews throughout history, they started to believe in the early Middle Ages, in the Kabbalistic period, that not only did the mezuzah provide protection from your home, but you could use it for other types of magic. And Maimonides wasn't into that at all. Okay? Okay, now, the Zohar, speaking of magic, here's what the Kabbalists were saying. Rabbi Abba said, how many holy forces are prepared when a person places a mezuzah on his gate? They all announce this is the gate of God, etc. The share of Israel is meritorious, and thus the Jews are known as the children of the Holy King, for all of them bear his sign. They are marked in the homes with the mezuzah at the entrance. So you can see now that through history, we're getting to the point where the mezuzah is somewhat taking on new meanings. And that here we're announcing to anyone who walks in that this is a gate of God, meaning that you should pay attention to say, it's as if you're walking into the holy temple, because I'm holier than thou in my house. Right? It was a joke. All right. Okay. Okay. Rabbi Joseph Caro, who wrote the Shulchan Aruch, before he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he wrote a commentary on Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, which is called the Kesef Mishnah, and here's what he wrote. Hillary, do you have a mic there? Would you mind reading where it says, therefore one must say?
Therefore, one must say it is true that the mezuzah protects the house when the mezuzah is written properly, without names of angels written in it. Further, when one makes a mezuzah, one does not intend to guard the house, but rather to fulfill the mitzvah of God. The automatic result is protection of the home.
Yeah. Okay, clear enough. And that's, that's Jewish law today. Now, one more midrash here. Why did they need 3 altars? And if we think about this, the whole time that the Jews were in Egypt, they knew that someday they were going to go free. Why? Because they knew their tradition. And their tradition was that they were the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And the story was that God told Abraham, yes, your children will be slaves in Egypt, in a foreign land, for hundreds of years, but they will go free with great substance, and I'll bring them back. I'll bring them to the promised land. So they knew that promise. So they knew that they were a people who were eternal, who were given this promise that someday you're going to go free. But why do they need 3 altars because of that promise? Well, it's repeated over and over in the Torah, but I brought you 2 examples. So if you look at Exodus 6:8 and Leviticus 26:42, I'll bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you can do that kind of math in your head, that's 3. But there's a difference between the original, the lintel, the person who got the original promise, but then the other 2 by whom you also merit going out. So the lintel represents Abraham, and the doorposts represent Isaac and Jacob. Right? And if you look at why not the women? Because this is what the verse says. What can I tell you? You look at Leviticus 26:42. Then I will remember my covenant with Jacob. I will remember my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. And those are just 2 examples, but there are many places in the Torah where God says, because I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that I'm going to bring you to the free land, you're going to go free. And so the Jews each had in their homeland, every time they left their doors and went out to be slaves, they passed through this gateway that reminded them that someday they were going to go free. And that was the hope. And so then, when God says, it's time for you now, after all the plagues, to really be protected and to put the blood on the doorposts of your home, then they knew that they were going free. Okay? So, the connection here, I think, to us is that we put our mezuzahs not on the inside, but on the outside. Because we don't leave our homes and dream about one day we'll go free. And so we need the blood on the inside to remind, the altars on the inside. For us, the mezuzah is on the outside because when we walk in, we're going into our holy temple, but we're free on the outside too. And so I think the mezuzah is meant to be that, like a quiet, ongoing echo of what happened in Egypt. And that's ultimately, I think, why the holiday had to be called Passover. Because it was only seemingly one detail of the story. And if we looked at it from the beginning, we might say, why don't you call it Exodus? Or why don't you call it, I don't know, I don't know. There are lots of different things you could call it. Why don't you call it Yetziat Mitzrayim, the leaving of Egypt? Simple. But the fact that you called it Passover means that the moment you went free was the moment you put the blood on your doorposts and said, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you know that blessing we've been waiting for? You know that promise that we believed in that would happen all of this time? It's happening now. So what did the blood on the door represent and the Jews leaving those homes for the very last time? It meant that God kept his promise to redeem us. And so we put mezuzahs on our door to remember that promise every time we walk into our mini temples, when we walk in our homes. And that's Passover. Okay, Shabbat Shalom.
You read the Exodus 6:8, it says, it solidifies the concept that God is only giving you the land to use. It's not yours.
That's right. It's his.
It's his.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice. It's custom. You don't have to.
if it's the same. Who doesn't? After 20? Who do you know after 20 that doesn't have a health issue? Well, you don't come on Friday nights.
Sometimes online too, but I didn't worry about that last night.
I've seen the name several times, I just don't know if it's her, and I didn't know who to ask. I don't know, but I mean, it takes one mother that has a sister or a mother by the name of Jackie, and she happens to have two girls. Well, they wouldn't be sisters with the same name, but you know, I know that my brother and I had a cousin, both of them with the same name, and I have no idea who was.
A friend like that too. We have two Marys in the same family.
Well,
It's
that
a marriage.
no, this is, you know, well, one of them,
They were both married at first, but they were.
one of them was my father's oldest brother's son, and then when my father had a son, it was the same name, so I assume it was a common ancestor, a grandfather or somebody, and both boys had a grandfather, and when they had a male child.
Happy Passover.
It is, but you know, it can happen.
Check, check.